Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I recently did a video about pop performance and how that's changed a lot, and we talked about Coachella, and it really got me thinking about how we talk about pop performance in general. And then I really started thinking more and more about this term lazy that always gets thrown around certain pop performances, because it's one of those accusations that sounds relatively simple on the surface, but the more you look into it, the more of a slippery slope it becomes. And so I really wanted to talk about, what do people actually mean when they call a performer lazy? Before we get into it, if you're really into pop culture analysis or movie analysis or what if series, looking at what if one thing had changed in this movie or this TV show, then this absolutely is the channel for you. Please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. There's a huge chunk of you that are watching this that aren't subscribed, so have a think. I'm not going to force you. But think about it. So, what do people mean when they talk about laziness in a performance? Do they mean the choreography looked low energy? Do they mean facial expressions weren't what they were expecting or were inconsistent? Do they mean somebody seemed checked out of a performance? Do they mean the idol's not giving the fan exactly what they feel like they are owed from this performance or are expecting from the performance? Or do they maybe mean something that's a lot harder to admit, which is that they don't know the difference between laziness, burnout, illness, setting boundaries, and simply someone refusing to completely destroy themselves physically for the public for our reassurance? And I think that this question feels very relevant at the moment because of the entire discourse between Manon from Cat's Eye. Hype ex-Geffen's official statement says that she's taking a temporary hiatus focusing on her health and well-being, while she said something quite differently and wanted to reassure the fans that she was fine and has been seen out and about being fine. Teen Vogue's reporting also adds that the hiatus has kind of reopened wider fan conversations around past accusations for Manon around laziness, whether she deserves her position in the group, and pressure surrounding just her general public image. And what I find so interesting about all of this is how quickly a fandom can move between two apparently very opposite stories. On the one hand, people are accusing idols of being lazy, disingenuous, disengaged, ungrateful, or not committed enough to the art. On the other hand, those same fandom spaces are constantly talking about worrying about the idols being overworked, seeing burnout, exhaustion, panic, and how brutal idol schedules are. So which one is it? Are the performers lazy, or are they overworked? Are they checked out, or are they collapsing under impossible demands they're set to meet? And if the answer changes depending on the day and the video clip that they've seen on TikTok, then maybe lazy is not actually a useful description at all. And so this video isn't necessarily about whether a few specific people were unfairly criticized for being lazy, although I do think that's happened a lot. I think it's more about what fandoms mean when they say lazy, why that label attaches especially hard to women and girl group members, and why the accusation often appears at exactly the point where the performer stops offering a perfect, total, smiling accessibility on demand. I think the first thing here to say is that the term lazy is rarely used as a neutral, descriptive word. It almost always has some type of moral accusation attached to it. When fans call a performer lazy, they're usually not just saying, the stage looked weaker than usual. They're saying something a lot bigger. They're saying that this person doesn't care enough, is not grateful enough, is not working hard enough, or really is just not suffering visibly enough to be in the role that they occupy. Lazy turns an uneven output into a character flaw for a musician. And that's why the label is so powerful, because once it sticks, it starts flattening out everything else around it. Fatigue immediately is laziness, injury, laziness, burnout, laziness, emotional withdrawal, laziness, ambivalence becomes laziness, and especially boundary setting is now labeled as laziness. Even inconsistency itself gets moralized, as though any performer who is not equally magnetic, energetic, exciting, and available at every single moment in their career must be secretly failing some deeper test of worthiness of being a pop star. And I think that that's especially true in idol culture, because idols aren't just expected to perform songs well. They're expected to perform commitment, to look always happy that they're there and grateful to be there, emotionally legible, something that we can latch onto, physically very polished, and permanently switched on, even if they've been touring for over a year. And you've been seeing it a lot with recent clips coming out from Manon from Twice, who's looking slightly dissociated on the stage at times. Luckily, most of the comments I'm seeing there is people going, well, they've been on tour for like a year straight. I think they need a break. However, once the standard is that we define these things as lazy, any crack in the image becomes really easy to read as personal failure, rather than maybe just human limitation. If you've spent any time in the K-pop space over the last few years, then you already know that Jennie from Blackpink became one of the defining names attached to the discourse around laziness. And I think that matters because her case is where the modern lazy idol narrative really became huge online. The accusations first really kind of took off in 2018, I think, when fan cams for the In Your Area era started circulating and people began building a whole story around her stage presence that quickly became much bigger than just one simple performance. Now, I do think that Jennie is an important example, but I do also think that Blackpink are a slightly messy case study to bring into this, just because with them there seems to always be something bigger going on structurally around the group, the release schedule, etc. Blackpink is a group that for K-pop standards has had unusually long gaps between releases compared to a lot of other girl groups. And by 2025, their first new group single since Born Pink in 2022 was only just arriving with Jump. So if I'm being honest, Blackpink might not be the cleanest example when looking at lazy versus not lazy, because there are clearly label issues, stop-start momentum, and long periods where they've had to perform the same songs and the same material over and over and over again. And if I had to do that and had to perform the same small pool of songs for years and years under the level of scrutiny that someone like Jennie is under, I would probably look like I was mentally checking out at various performances as well. That doesn't mean that every criticism of Jennie's stage presence was invented. I don't think it is, but it does mean that the word lazy starts looking incredibly blunt when you place it next to the bigger context. Blackpink themselves have spoken a lot about the pressure of fame and performance, and Jennie has talked openly about burnout. Jisoo has talked about being on stage feeling more than a test than something to enjoy. I can't even imagine the level of scrutiny that these girls are under when they're on stage, knowing everyone is filming every single angle of you at every second of the concert. So for me, Jennie is still an important example because I think it really opened up the discourse around being a lazy idol, but less because I think she proves the case cleanly and more because she just shows how fast the fandom can turn themselves on unevenness in a character diagnosis. And then of course we get to Manon, which I think is such a revealing current example because it exposes the contradiction right at the heart of how people talk about idols. Teen Vogue reported that the hiatus quickly reignited the discussion around those earlier accusations of laziness, fan concern, and speculation about the pressure surrounding her position within the group. And of course, we saw a lot of this in the documentary Star Academy, where we see her joining the group. And even within the group themselves, in the pool of girls that were fighting to be in Cat's Eye, there was a lot of conversation around whether she was giving enough, whether she wanted to be there, whether she was lazy, not showing up to rehearsals. And she always framed it as, no, I'm just setting boundaries for myself. However, what I think makes the whole thing even more complicated is that fans have been reading it against two very different sets of images at once. On the one hand, there's the recent behind the scenes video that Cat's Eye uploaded onto their YouTube channel where the girls look very spent after their performances. We're talking oxygen, ice packs, post-stage desert collapses, that kind of energy. On the other hand, people then see Manon out on stage dancing during Pink Pantheress' set. And suddenly the official explanation starts feeling like only a part of the story. We also know from reporting that Manon was visibly present at Coachella Weekend 2, even while still not performing with Cat's Eye. We don't know whether they saw each other, whether they said hi to each other, whether there was any interaction, but you're starting to see that there's two stories happening at the same time, making me think, is there a deeper underlying reason why Hybe put her on hiatus, maybe forced her so? Now, I do want to be careful here because I do not think that a clip of idols needing oxygen or ice packs on the head just to cool down immediately proves that they're uniquely overworked in some catastrophic sense. These are elite performers doing intense cardio sets in the desert heat for more than 45 minutes. If we saw an athlete sprinting and afterwards icing their leg or catching their breath after a competition, we wouldn't instantly say that they were burnt out or exploited just because of that moment. That is part of what high-level physical performance looks like. So I don't think that those clips that we've seen on their own prove everything. Do I think it's normal if idols are passing out after stages and always requiring oxygen? No, but I think if they're performing in the desert and they've not had a lot of sleep because they're currently on a very hectic schedule going to various festivals because it's festival season, I think it makes sense that they've got an ice pack on their head because it's the fastest way to cool down if you're overheating. What I do think proves something much more serious is the wider schedule, right? The travel, the lack of sleep, the non-stop promotional churn. Songs are coming out, new dances are coming out, people are requesting more. People were unhappy that Cat's Eye was performing the same dance breaks at Coachella that they did at Lollapalooza.
I'm so tired. I got to sleep 2 hours total, but it's okay.
Get glam at 7:30 a.m. Lobby call time is 9 a.m. Photos, then media starts. Oh my god. And then 12 a.m. we have a wake-up call. Fire.
And that is where I think the overworking conversation becomes much more convincing. So the Manon situation is interesting to me, not because I think we know exactly what happened behind the scenes, but because it shows how quickly people swing between calling one person lazy and calling the rest overworked, when in reality, the situation is probably a lot more complicated. Maybe Manon was setting boundaries for herself. Maybe she said, you know what, we are all overworked. I'm getting burnt out. I don't want to do that. And she set boundaries, and for that reason, they put her on hiatus. Wouldn't look good on Hype, would it, if they said Manon's feeling burnt out, but the rest of the girls are going to continue anyway? Everyone would be like, what's going on? It's easier to say she's focusing on health issues. Does it help that Manon is seen out and about, running around and having a great time for that narrative? No, but I think that's because she's trying to shape her own narrative. Now, I have no idea whether she's going to come back. I hope she does, because I think she looks great in the group, but I also hope she does what's best for her. Maybe what some of the fans are seeing as disengagement is that boundary setting. Maybe some of what Hybe has named as clean health hiatus was actually tied up with bigger tensions. Maybe both things are true at the same time. Either way, the contradiction in fan reaction matters. And one reason that I don't think it's just about Jennie and Manon, like just one or two people, is because K-pop has repeatedly given us examples of K-pop idols stepping back for health reasons after long periods of pressure to appear permanently functional. ITZY's Leah went on hiatus in 2023 over what JYP described as extreme levels of anxiety. Why do you think she had them? Because everyone was calling her lazy and incompetent all of the time. Later, she returned actually after treatment and rest and improved her symptoms. I think it's one of the best cases where she took a really long break and we didn't know what was going to happen, but she's finally come back. Twice's Mina also paused activities due to extreme anxiety and insecurity about performing on stage, and Jonghyun had multiple breaks tied to anxiety and I think a few other health reasons as well. They were both massively criticized. Mina's constantly criticized for not having the best stage presence, not looking the most engaged during the performances. Jonghyun, after her return, has constantly been scrutinized about the way she looks and whether that allows her to dance the same way as the other girls, and is it good enough, and it's not meeting K-pop standards. I mean, it's exhausting. Red Velvet's Joy is another strong example of this as well, because she took a hiatus in 2023 due to poor health and then later resumed activities after some time away. Now, all of those obviously are different situations. Not all of them received exactly the same amount of lazy backlash as Jennie, Manon, and Leah did. But they do make one thing very hard to ignore. If we already know that this industry produces anxiety, panic, collapse, and burnout, then fans should maybe be a lot more cautious before treating low energy, inconsistency, or visible strain during live performances as evidence of laziness. The more examples you collect, the less plausible it becomes to act as though every weaker stage is just somebody not caring enough about their art. I also think this isn't just a K-pop conversation, to be, completely honest here, even if K-pop makes the pattern especially visible. In Western pop, the accusation isn't always literally lazy, but the same logic shows up around long absences, delayed releases, boundaries, and the idea that an artist is somehow withholding what fans are entitled to. Rihanna's a really obvious example here. The reaction to ongoing wait for R9 has become such a pop culture ritual that Vogue literally wrote a piece arguing it's maybe a good thing she still hasn't released the album, precisely because the constant complaint has become so normalized. If we look at the reaction to Rihanna's halftime show at the Super Bowl performance, it was, again, she's lazy because she was pregnant and didn't perform the same way that she would if she hadn't been pregnant. Normani, I think, is another really good case because she's openly talked a lot about the backlash she received after her constantly delayed debut release, while also explaining that both of her parents had cancer during that period. I do think there's a lot more to say about Normani in general. I think she's being held back by her label massively and being done a disservice, but I just wanted to throw her in here as an example of public scrutiny under release schedules. Sky Ferreira might be one of the clearest examples of it all if you want proof that not releasing doesn't automatically mean not working, because years of delay were tied up with label conflict, ownership disputes, and being unable to get music out on her own terms. Then, of course, we have the boundaries version of the same problem, and I have to bring up someone like Chapel Roan. Again, she wasn't really called lazy, but the backlash around her setting these boundaries shows how quickly audiences punish women when they stop being maximally available to the public. Now, I'm gonna do a bit of a quick side road here, which might be a bit odd to some of you, but me and my dad yesterday were talking about the drummer from Rush, Neil Peart. He was very vocal in saying that his relationship with the audience was separated. He knew audiences wanted a clearer glimpse into his personal life and understanding what was going behind the scenes, but he set a clear boundary that for him, that's just not the way he wanted to do things, and people accepted that. Now, of course, Rush sits in a completely different musical sphere than someone like Chapel Roan. I think the rock scene is maybe a lot more accepting of boundaries than pop, but I'm not as well versed in it. I've listened to a lot of rock growing up, but I'm not as well versed in the rock culture element of things, but people accepted that he had this boundary. They knew they wanted more, but they knew that wasn't his thing, and so they were fine with that. But if someone like Chapel Roan does it, she immediately gets scrutinized for it. The Guardian reported on her calling out invasive fan behavior, and Vice quoted Zara Larsson saying that when women have boundaries, people just completely freak out. So whether the words lazy, difficult, checked out, rude, ungrateful, or where is the album, I think the mechanism is often the same. Fans decide a star owes them constant flow of access, effort, output, and visible devotion, especially in K-pop, where the rollout schedules are crazy, the variety shows are crazy. And so when that flow breaks, the explanation becomes moral rather than just human. I also think there's a smaller but very important note here to touch on, which is that audiences, I think, are just very uncomfortable with inconsistency. A performer who's always average is often easier for people to process than a performer who sometimes is incredible and sometimes maybe falls a bit flat, because inconsistency invites interpretation. People start asking why. They start building stories around it. They decide someone is checked out, arrogant, lazy, distracted, or no longer deserving of the pedestal they were put on by their own fandom. And I think that's part of why this accusation can attach so strongly to stars who are visibly charismatic when they are on, because once audiences know that you're capable of that, anything less can feel like betrayal of what they're entitled to rather than just fluctuation. It's not fair, but it is common. You see something adjacent in the way that Dua Lipa talked about the infamous 2018 dance clip that got mocked online. She later described the memeified performance as humiliating, which is useful because it shows how quickly one viral reading of performance can override everything else. And then if we look at the audience reaction to her after she's clearly taken some dance lessons and is fantastic on stage, it's an immediate turnaround, and we forget how much work do you think went into that? How many days of feeling burnt out do you think went into that? A clip gets flattened into evidence of deficiency, and suddenly the whole person becomes reducible to that one interpretation. So even when the exact word isn't lazy, the mechanism is familiar. The audience spots something imperfect, turns it into a moral narrative, and then keeps reading the performance through that lens. And that is the point I'll keep coming back to, because what if what some of you guys call laziness is just boundary setting? What if not every performer wants to write every drop of themselves out for public reassurance? What if some people are more willing than others to pull back when they're exhausted, sick, overwhelmed, or simply unwilling to keep giving at a level that is unsustainable for them? What if what looks undercommitted from the outside in some cases is the only reason the person is still standing at all? Look at Mark Lee taking the decision to leave NCT. It's been met, of course, with a lot of sadness, but I think everyone understands that this man has given 10 years of his life to an extreme schedule, and now maybe he wants something else. That doesn't mean that every criticism is invalid. Obviously, some performances are genuinely weak. Obviously, some people have off nights. Some stars sometimes coast through performances and through tours, especially when they get to the end of it. But I think the larger problem is that fandoms reach for lazy far too quickly, because it's a really satisfying accusation. It turns uncertainty about what's going on into a simple judgment. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes a lot harder not to see that there's a gendered aspect to it, how fandom driven it really is, and how often it protects the machinery behind these idols rather than questioning it. It's easier to say one idol is lazy than to admit that the system is inhumane and what you are finding joy in and participating in every day has moral questions. It's easier to call one pop star checked out than to admit that audiences now expect endless access, endless output, endless enthusiasm, and especially endless gratitude for the position that they've come into. Lazy is a very convenient word, sometimes too convenient. So when I hear people call a pop star lazy, I trust the word a lot less now than maybe I used to when I was younger and my frontal lobe hadn't fully developed. Sometimes they might mean the performance was weak, the energy felt off, they saw some inconsistency, but I think very often the word is doing a lot more than that. It's turning exhaustion into failure, protecting impossible expectations, and punishing performers, especially women, for not performing availability, devotion, and perfection at all times. Now, I'm not saying all of this to get you to feel an incredible amount of sympathy for performers. I know that a lot of us deal with expectations being set on us by employers, etc., on a daily basis as well. This is just me trying to deep dive why I think some of this narrative gets built around pop performers from time to time, and to also look at the scrutiny that these performers are on a constant basis. And so this is why I think the Manon example is so revealing to me. The same culture that can call someone lazy can also insist idols are overworked and pushed too hard. And if both of those reactions are living side by side, then clearly lazy is not just an objective label. It's part of emotional language that fans are using when they feel disappointed, confused, shut out, or no longer reassured by the constant machine that's pushing out content for them. And that doesn't mean that idols are beyond criticism. It just means that we should probably be more careful with the kinds of criticism that can turn one person's limits into a moral flaw. Maybe the lazy pop star does exist, but I think much more often what people are actually reacting to is a performer whose humanity has become visible, and that feels uncomfortable for some people. But what do you think? Do you think I've missed the mark there? Do you agree with what I've said? Are there other pop stars that you think are under that same level of scrutiny as some of the ones we've touched on today? Let me know in the comments below. Like I said at the beginning, you should consider subscribing. We do a lot of fun stuff on this channel, and I'm always open to ideas on what to talk about next. Until then though, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.